Welcome back, everyone, for another episode of the Gold Standard Podcast. My name is Brandon Dismokowski, and as always, I'm joined by my amazing co-hosts.
Brianna Snyder.
And
Kate Weimer.
today we are joined by the amazing Bailey Payne, the author of The Behavior Breakthrough. Bailey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you all?
Good.
Terrific.
Good. Good.
One of the things that we always like to ask is, how did you get into ABA? How did you get to where you are now, and what are the plans for the future?
Yeah, similar going with the theme of your podcast, I definitely fell into it. I think we all have our different journeys of it finding us instead of always us having the awareness and knowledge to be able to seek it out. Um, I started my college experience in psychology. I knew I wanted to work with kids, and I knew I had a passion for advocacy and I think just being around people with exceptionalities. I just didn't really know what I wanted that to look like. And so I graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology, and there's just not a lot you can do with that. So yeah, so I experienced that. And I actually fell into a job that I loved. I did child protective services with that bachelor's degree in psychology for like 5 years. And I always say, like, that's the job that made me a woman. That's the job that gave me my view and perspective on life. That's the job that has totally shaped my core values more than anything. Um, but it also was extremely hard. I was emotionally not able to clock out. I mean, I was like full steam ahead with that. So pursued my master's degree in clinical psychology, and thought maybe I would like to like help kids in the foster care system, like just in a more therapeutic role. That was kind of my passion even then. I feel like, ABA finds us, um, but we always kind of had it in us, just didn't know what it was. And so, even when I was doing child protective services, my passion was helping those really challenging behaviors to be able to maintain placements. And I remember even helping an individual that had gone through residential placements. And I remember, and I was 20 years old when I got hired to do child protective services. Like I was a baby. But I remember even then recognizing in this individual that this is not a behavioral issue. This individual has autism, and we're not treating this appropriately. And I remember being like 20 years old, and I drove this person in my car across the state to go get an appropriate diagnosis. And so I think I've always had the passion. I just didn't know how to apply it. And so in my master's program, I was, being trained to be an outpatient mental health therapist, and that was just not my vibe. I did not fit in that program. I just was lost and misunderstood and totally not appreciated in that program. I mean, genuinely. And I started my practicum and internship at a state hospital. And there were some behavior analysts through the University of Kansas connected to this program, and they just scooped me up. I feel like we all kind of have a similar story where somebody scooped us up and it was like, oh, yes, this is the fit.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I'd
that's
like
how I found ABA.
back because I don't know if I've interacted with anybody before that's worked for child protective services. Did you experience culture shock?
Yeah, I would say like I definitely come from a background of privilege for sure. And always had a two-parent household. Just your sit down to eat dinner together, had a consistent life, had traditions and routines, and had access to all the privileges. And funny story, when I went to interview for the job for Child Protective Services, I thought I was interviewing for like a case management job for kids with like mental health struggles and challenging behaviors. I thought that's what I was interviewing for and got hired. And it wasn't until I went to training that I was like, oh, this is like people have been removed from their homes. Like, this is not what I was expecting. And I was like, let's give it a try. So yes, I would definitely say culture shock. Yes, just I don't know if I was ever like, I don't know, shock, like I was never frozen and didn't know what to do, but I definitely got exposure to things that made me extremely much more well-rounded, for sure.
I can say when I first started working in ABA, I experienced something similar. I didn't start working with learners who were on the spectrum. It was more of a behavior disability program. So that was something that I've never
No.
experienced before. And it teaches you a lot real fast. So that's the only reason why I asked, because it made me think back to my first experiences. And I felt like I left going home. I was very wide-eyed and I was like, I can't believe this is a job. So I was curious if you had a very similar experience, and it sounded like you did.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I know you said that you were very young, and reflecting back in my 20s, my work-life balance and coping mechanisms do not look the same as they do today. And I would imagine that the burnout rate is extremely high when working at Child Protective Services. So did you experience burnout? And if you did, how did you navigate that?
1,000%. I experienced burnout. I mean, I was not able to emotionally shut it off. I had never like had so many people at my fingertips that literally physically needed me so bad. And, we're all in this field, we want to help people. And so I had no boundaries whatsoever. I remember, I think where they I had a BlackBerry cell phone at the time. Okay, I'm not very young. And I remember like my kids on my caseload, they would run away and I would be their first person they would call, and I would try to coax them back and solve the situation, like just no boundaries. So, yes, I experienced high burnout for sure. I knew that that job would not be my lifelong career, but I did know that I was gaining things in that job that were fulfilling to me, and I knew that it was going to be a life changer for just my perspectives and how I view the world, that it would help me. So, yeah, for sure.
I'm assuming then you didn't just work at the call center. You were somebody who was an ongoing support for these families.
Boots on the
Okay.
Yeah,
ground.
yeah, for sure. I kind of did it all. I did some investigations. I worked reunification, and I feel like I'm always a person that really roots for the underdog. Like that's kind of just my entire core value system. And the system was set up to where, removal and adoption was a pretty easy process. But really working with families and then advocating in the system and in the courts to foster reunification, that was extremely challenging. And so that was my goal. And so I went hard, full speed ahead, no boundaries. And yeah, it chewed me up and spit me out for sure. And like you said, I was 20 years old, and it's funny. I teach at a university now, and I look at 20-year-olds, and I'm like, gosh, they're babies. But when I was 20, I was a full-blown adult. I wasn't. I was so a child.
Grew up really quickly from doing what you were doing.
Yes, I would
It's
definitely
you
think so.
said something earlier, and it was you know, you mentally took all of this stuff home. What were some of like the more nightmarish situations that you were like, I just cannot shake this?
Yeah. Um, so I was doing child protective services during the time. I mean, it made national news at the time, and gosh, I don't remember what year that was, with the Joplin F5 tornado went through Joplin, Missouri. And so, I mean, and it wiped out a large portion. It was a 5 mile wide tornado that leveled the city. And I remember the next morning after that tornado, I mean, my job was to physically walk the neighborhoods to account for the kids on my caseload. And you speak nightmares, that immediately comes to my mind almost more than all of the physical abuse, exploitation. That sticks out with me more than anything. I remember closing my eyes at night and just seeing, that was my first real experience of Yeah, that was traumatic for me to like experience that for sure. Yeah.
Were you affected by that as well? The tornado?
I was not. So I lived like 20 miles north and was unaffected. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that would have been even more difficult if you and your family were affected and then having to take care of a bunch of
Right.
others and their families too.
For
I
sure. Absolutely.
I feel like that's something that people don't talk about too much, especially, I mean, even in our field, we work in some situations where, you carry your emotions home with you. Sometimes you learn to just shut it off, but then you shut everything off at
Yeah.
once. But it's nothing that they teach you in grad school. There's no course for it. And then it's on us to teach our clients coping skills. And sometimes us as adults don't have those tools to really be successful, which I feel like is part of the reason why burnout is so high even in our field, is that we're sending these 20-year-olds into these situations that they're not equipped for yet.
Yeah.
I think a big part of that too is the core indicator. So it's not so much of what do I do when it happens, but identifying that it's happening. Yeah. Because I think when you finally realize it's almost too late and you're like drowning, yeah. So
Yeah.
being able to identify those emotions, just like we try to teach our learners, like, hey, I'm feeling angry and this is what it looks like. These are
Yeah.
what my behaviors look like when I'm angry. Hey, I'm an adult and this is what it looks like when I start to experience burnout and how to stop it. So I think working from the very basics is so important.
Yeah. And it must have been tough too, because like we talk about in the field using the resources, but when you are the resource in that particular situation where you're the only thing that these people are like really clinging to and you're completely drained, what do you do? I
Absolutely.
not as much either is when you are the resource that's being used up and when you're all used up, what's left?
And I think there's like, it's a double-edged sword too, because it's like, okay, if I'm burnt out, I'm not using the tools, I'm not having appropriate boundaries. But I think it's also healthy to normalize that sometimes the system's just a lot. And
Yeah.
maybe your coping skills are adequate. This is just a lot.
Mhm.
So I think that sometimes there's almost like shame and guilt attached to feeling burnout because I don't have the skills. I need to learn the skills. I'm not using the skills appropriately. But like you said, when you're so immersed, we don't even have the awareness until it's too late. And then it's just that the system is sometimes just too much.
So, I mean, jumping from that, and honestly, we could share more stories about that. But jumping from that experience, you then kind of just decided, like, hey, I want to just focus on compassionate care. Like, everything that I'm doing and everything that I'm seeing, I need to bring compassionate care into the next journey. Like, what was your mindset for that?
I don't know that I had language at the time for that mindset. I just knew that there was a lot of broken systems and I wanted to make waves in the broken systems. My master's program was a broken system. I was genuinely not appreciated in that program because I wasn't a good fit. And, child protective services, it's a broken system. There's so many systems that have challenges to them that I don't know that I realized at the time that I wanted to bring compassion and an element that that's part of what was missing, but I knew I wanted to make waves and be different.
In what ways can you identify that those programs are not compassionate?
So, I mean, for sure, child protective services, starting at the beginning of my career, I mean, it's just a punitive system for sure. There and there was a lack of meeting people's emotional, physical, medical, mental health needs to rectify the situation. And it was just punitive. And then even in my master's program, I mean, I remember being told if you want to continue doing child protective services full time, you just need to go be a full time social worker. You're not a fit for this program. You're not prioritizing your education. And that it just was punitive. And so I feel like so many systems that I'm a part of that I realize there's challenges to them, I feel like it's always a punitive issue. It's just like fit this mold or go. Fit this mold or, you'll be shamed. Fit this mold or you don't belong. So I don't know. I feel like we could generalize that almost to all systems, really.
And I know you do a lot of work in that now to bring more of that compassion to these programs. So do you want to share a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, so now the system that I would say I participate in more than anything is public education, for sure. And, bringing compassionate care to public education where there's a lot of punitive systems in place in public education. We know that the function of behavior and diving into why behaviors are happening doesn't correspond with school district's policy and disciplinary actions. It doesn't change behavior. And so, it's making really big waves in the system to take a different approach. And it's really off putting to people that don't understand it or have just, specialized in education for so long that that is what they know. So that is, just another system of trying to bring compassion and trying to bring knowledge and awareness of a different perspective to try. I'm not saying that what I have to offer is the answer, but I do know that when I see a current system that's not working, that we should try something else.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big takeaway. What you said is that this is what they know. So you don't know what you don't know. So being that change agent is sometimes difficult because people are like, well, we've always done it this way. It's fine.
Yeah.
So I know we come across that too, where they're like, what do you mean there's another way? This is too fluffy. They should just know what they're doing or things like that.
Yeah. And it's always almost immediately met with pushback. Like, oh, well, I had a situation the other day. I got a crisis call for a kid in the gym and he wasn't participating. And that was it. That was the crisis call. I showed up and they were like, well, he's not playing basketball. Okay. So I walk over and I said, what's going on, man? Turns out he didn't get a chance to eat breakfast. So he was hungry. He was upset. He felt like he missed breakfast. And that was it. And immediately the teachers wanted, the heavies to come in and deal some kind of consequence. And it just was not the issue. But then when I, ended up handling it and walking away, they're like, all right, well, what's his consequence? Is he missing recess? I was like, no,
No, you just needed
Yeah.
breakfast.
he just
Actually,
needs
that's
breakfast.
illegal, so no.
Well, yes. Yeah.
And it's
Right. I mean, it's go ahead.
bad.
Well, and I think that that's part of compassionate care and the waves that, we're trying to make in certain systems is that one size doesn't fit all. Like compassionate care is just individualizing it. And I think we could generalize that to educators, to parenting, professionals. Like, some kids at work, you can eat before bed because the circumstances are different from one kid to the other and from one student to the other. And I know that that is extremely overwhelming to educators who are responsible for 20 some, 30 some odd students that, this idea of being individualized and understanding the why on top of the standards and on top of all of the things that they're already responsible for feels extremely daunting and impossible. But for change to happen, I mean, that's it. That's necessary.
Kind of leads us into our segue of behavior breakthrough. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how you're able to use that with educators and, kind of spreading behavior analysis in a more palatable way.
Well, that's the goal. So I hope that's what Behavior Breakthrough does. So Behavior Breakthrough is a book that I collaborated on. I will never say that I wrote it. I collaborated with a ghostwriter, and she just specializes in like totally immersing herself into somebody's personality and area of expertise and just putting it into writing. So for anybody that's thinking about writing a book, you don't have to be able to do it. You just find the perfect person to collaborate with. But I think that it kind of morphed out of at the time that I started disseminating ABA was during COVID. I was a single mom at the time with a toddler at home. My um, toddler that I was a single mom to is neurodivergent, and I had access to no support. And those were some long days. It was challenging. And then I also couldn't provide direct support to my entire caseload that we had been separated from. And so I was trying to offer some virtual support, and it was just becoming really time consuming, and I was struggling to reach everybody. And so I just created a Facebook page and was like, to not just my caseload, but anybody that's struggling with behaviors during COVID. And it kind of just grew from there. And so it kind of just morphed from, hey, I want to show my daughter that anything is possible and you can create something good no matter the situation. But also, I'm so passionate about, the reputation that ABA has and the way that I've personally witnessed ABA be delivered is not all loving. And so I wanted to make waves in a system that can show that to me, ABA really is about love. I mean, I see everything in my life through an ABA lens, and it is loving in my life. And so to hear about other experiences that are so awful, I'm like, oh, that's so heartbreaking because this behavioral science really does drive me to be compassionate and loving solely by following the principles. And so it was kind of just the combination, I think, of both of those motivations.
I think that's huge because you brought something to people in times where that was a rough time. I remember, working with some of our clients. We were running sessions outdoors because families didn't want us indoors. We were, virtual, and you're trying to coach parents through things that you just wish you could be there because they're not able to handle whatever's going on, on the other side of that phone or that computer. So I think having those resources and bringing it back to those basics was definitely a big help to the families that you were able to reach.
Yeah.
Being that you have experience as a clinician and as a parent, is there any advice that you can offer BCBAs and RBTs providing ABA therapy in the realm of compassion? Like if you had to give like one thing to say, like this would just change the support that you provide from, 0 to 100, what would that be?
Oh, concise it into one thing. I don't know. I just think that,
That's fine, but I didn't want to overwhelm you. It sounds like I did the opposite.
no, but it's such a good question. I think that it's kind of twofold for me. Number one, I think that we just have to have realistic expectations for people. I've been a single mom, and I promise you, I don't parent like a behavior analyst. And it's like my children's local schools. I hope they don't actually know what I do for a living. Right? Like giving, so people need and deserve grace because sometimes like the caregiver, mom, dad's mental health matters more than reinforcing an undesired behavior that we don't want to see again. And so I think just seeing the parent first and foremost as a human that also has needs within the family and the household structure. That I think changes don't toss over a complex behavior intervention. Don't overwhelm, don't expect a strict degree of fidelity. It's just not realistic. And then kind of segueing to what you said too, it's like about those foundations. I think to me, that's the whole goal of behavior breakthrough is I see in a lot of caregiver trainings and a lot of educator trainings that where we usually start with our training is let me tell you about behavioral function. Let me tell you what the function of this behavior is. Now, here's our new intervention. And that's not sustainable if the educator and parent doesn't have the prerequisite skills to set up the environment to begin with to prevent behavior. So it's just not sustainable. So I think that that's my goal of behavior breakthrough. And that's always been my approach with caregiver training is to start with those prerequisite skills like descriptive praise and can you state it positively and what do you attend to versus what you don't and being able to discriminate like your gym situation what's an issue and what's a non-issue what's a what is actual reinforcement and what's a bribe and discriminate like those to me are necessary foundational prerequisite skills that have to be in place before any behavioral interventions are delivered to really drive that adherence piece of it.
And this may be a redundant question, but kind of the same for educators. What advice would you give an educator that you know has a very rigid style of teaching that you would like them to use some strategies from behavior breakthrough?
Yeah, I think that, speaking to educators, I think the biggest thing too is to just see them as standalone people first, that their mental health matters more than their students in any plan I walk into their classroom with. Whether you're training a parent or a caregiver, if something is on somebody's mind, and I think how many of us have left a training where I showed up with this structured protocol and I had these topics that I was going to discuss, and you walk away and you're like, shoot, I didn't get to any of that. I failed. But just listening and meeting them where they were at is part of the necessary journey of connecting with that educator or parent, a caregiver, and seeing them who as a standalone person before we train. That is the compassionate care piece to me. So I think with an educator, I just want to understand them and their needs first. And then for me, my process is usually always the same with educators and caregivers. Let me just show you first, and then let's talk about it. So I don't want to describe anything to you. I don't want to show, like, even letting somebody know, oh, there's a different way to do that. There's automatic defenses that go up, like, oh, thanks for coming in here to judge me. And, it's that. I think that that's punitive. It's aversive to people. It's aversive to me when people do that. And so I think it's just about meeting them where they're at, understanding who people are. Each classroom has a different culture, each teacher has a different value system, and that's where you start.
I think a huge part of that is because teachers oftentimes don't get their superiors coming in to tell them what they're doing right. 9 times out of 10, they're coming in there to tell them what they need to fix or what
Mhm.
they're doing
Yeah.
wrong. And I
The
think,
silent observations that are a little bit daunting.
Yeah.
well, that's the other thing too. Like when they're coming in, they don't always know it. It's an unannounced observation, and your scores are based on a 40-minute, you know, peek into their world where they could be running a math segment and one student is having an extremely hard time that day, and then they don't get great scores. And going back to what you had said with being defensive, we have to look at it that way too and say, damn, I understand where you're coming from. That would feel really crummy to me too. If the only time I was getting any kind of feedback, it was negative or constructive.
Yeah.
So I think building a rapport and including compassionate care from a BCBA to a teacher standpoint is huge too. Because if you don't show that one, you're a team player, or two, that you see the good that they're doing, it's going to be very hard for them to grasp what you're saying and then apply it.
1,000%. Absolutely.
And I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, thinking about my master's program or, a lot of master's programs that are out there now, I'm a little ways out from my program, but they don't teach you soft skills. You teach the test and that's it. So you're now this robot coming out of your BCBA exam. Someone asks you for help, you're like, oh, great, I have a solution for that. Here you go. Behavior plan done. It's like a skill you acquire over time if you haven't acquired that during your supervision process. And sometimes it's humbling because you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that response. And that's feedback within itself. But it's as new BCBAs, I definitely have felt that.
I agree. And I think part of the like natural life process is I feel like the deepest levels of compassion come out of some storm. I just think that's the process of life. Like our biggest growth periods and our biggest abilities to have a different perspective on things have been when we've suffered for a little bit.
Yeah. Or when you encounter that really difficult situation, like you're saying, it's a think on your feet type of situation
Yeah.
and flex a skill that you didn't know you had, or maybe you do fall on your face and you use that as a learning opportunity. I know we talk about that a lot here. Failure is definitely not inevitable in ABA. At some point, you're going to fail, and that's okay. As long as you use that as a pivotal point of, okay, this is what I'm going to do better for next time. Then you're a successful BCBA. If
Yeah.
you can't take those failures and turn them into successes, then you're in for a really bumpy ride.
Absolutely.
When you were going through like the writing of Behavior Breakthrough, you did you have like any significant experiences that you were like, oh wait, I definitely need to include this in there, or was it just too many experiences that you were like, I can't fit everything in this book?
I don't know if there was specific experiences, but I think that behavior breakthrough is kind of just based on a model of training that I have pieced together over the last 10 plus years. Um, I was really lucky and I accessed really top quality supervision when I was working on my coursework. And so it started then of how I was exposed to different training methods. And then I had multiple BCBA supervisors. And so I just feel like I have pieced together so many different things that I've created this like standardized protocol that I have like changed and morphed over the years. And so for me, it was just like, here's my approach. Here's how I teach these prerequisite skills, if you will, for, behavior change. And it's just kind of, I think that that's more so how behavior breakthrough kind of unfolded as opposed to like different professional experiences that I've gained. I have been lucky that even when working on my coursework and getting my field experience hours, I have always had a humongous wide array of populations and environments. I have spent a hot minute in a clinic. Everything has been in the community, in hospitals, in home, in school. Like I have always served one client across multiple settings and have just gained so many different experiences as a result of that for sure.
And I think that's great because, you know, yes, the clinic setting is great for certain experiences. However, in the real world, even like you were saying before to parents, the fidelity is not going to be there. You're not
Yeah.
going to have this 100% treatment integrity across the board every day in the settings that you mentioned. So I think it teaches you to be flexible rather than, especially again, going back to newer BCBAs, they learn to the test. And when I have conversations with new BCBAs, they're like, well, they can't do that. They're reinforcing these behaviors. I'm like, yes, well, welcome to the real world where these things are happening in real time, and we can't stick to this strict protocol all the time. Yeah, we're using the science, but it's not just black and white anymore.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned in Behavior Breakthrough that you have a teaching model. Can you give us a brief breakdown of what that looks like?
Yeah, so it starts with it works through 12 skills. And I start with descriptive phrase. I have to pull my table of contents. I'm like gonna
Have to give us
blank on them.
I don't want
What?
Can
to
you read it
away.
from
No, I've got it. I've got it. You're good. I literally teach on this also at a university just today. So it's funny that I'm like, what are my prerequisite skills? But right, I start with descriptive praise and then stating things positively, delivering preferred outcomes appropriate, and just having that awareness of if you're going to deliver something preferred. Think about timing, think about behaviors, and first and contingencies, directed choices. Just I work through these 12 steps of just I think I just consider them prerequisite skills that to me, if an educator, if a caregiver doesn't have those skills, then function-based responding is not going to be sustainable.
And I love that it's not just your regular book. It's visually appealing. There's some nice little, pieces of artwork, so to say, in there. And I like it because it makes it more fun for people to read, rather than just like your basic, yeah,
yeah.
your basic Cooper book or, a lot of other training manuals, so to say. You make it fun
Yeah.
for the reader.
Well, that's the goal. I mean, I feel like ABA is it's easily unapproachable,
Yes.
right? If you know nothing about behavioral analysis, ABA is easily unapproachable. And I don't know, I think that, to me, ABA is so important and it is love. And so I want it to be approachable because I think that it definitely can help a teacher have a longer career in education. And the power of it we know can be effective. We just need to make it digestible and make it, delivered in a way that resonates with people.
When you go in to provide support to schools, is the teacher asking for your support or are you being pushed into those classrooms by admin?
Yeah, right. So no public education district ever has excess funding. So it never gets to be by teacher request just because the amount of hours that's allotted, the amount of funding, I mean, there's so many limitations with BCBAs in schools for sure. So yeah, nope, I am directly driven where I need to be based on usually a special education director is in charge of kind of discriminating and where's our priorities. This is where you need to go serve. Yeah. So unfortunately, it doesn't get to be teacher request.
So with that being said, are you always greeted with a smile when you enter the
I
classroom?
was just gonna ask.
Am I ever greeted with a smile? No, 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 no. Because, like you mentioned earlier, anytime somebody comes into the classroom, it's an aversive experience. Nobody likes to be monitored. Nobody likes to be observed. They feel judged. It's all uncomfortable. It's like opening your home to ABA for the first time. It's such a vulnerable experience. How can I have to vacuum every day? I have to pick up everything, make the beds. People are coming over. Like that's stressful. And so I would assume it's a very similar experience. So nope, not greeted with smiles.
So being that you're discussing, you're on there on a time crunch, right? There's a budget. You probably have X amount of time within these classrooms or these programs. How do you get the most, I guess, bang for your buck in a sense that building a rapport with that staff, but also being able to make significant behavior change?
I think that for me, the connection building, that's all happening just through observations and just spending time with them and catching them, not during core instruction, but during transitions and just easier times to have somebody around. That's usually where I start. And then I would say that my quote unquote buy in or willingness, if you will, happens when um, my typical process is we kind of call them like little boot camp days, and they just know I'm going to live in your classroom for like 3 consecutive days. And I just tell the teacher, I think that caregivers and educators, they're so tired, they're so burnt out, and they're so used to people telling them what to do without ever showing them how to do it. And not just show me for 5 minutes, like live here and show me. If you want me to buy into this, show me that it works. And so usually that first day, I just tell them like, "Hey, you may not like anything that I do and you totally have that right, but I'm at least going to give you one vacation day. My first day here, I just want you to just chill and watch. You can work on lesson plans. You don't have to be just like solely, but I just want you to have a respite day. You deserve that if that's all you get out of this experience." And I'll just model it for a whole day. And then the goal is by the second day, I'm starting to fade myself out. That third day, they're doing it independently while I'm just coaching and giving feedback. And then it becomes just a check in process.
I do love that. I I will say I don't think there's anybody out there who would turn down a nice break. So
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't matter. Like, whatever. You pass a background check, I will give you my children. It's fine. I'm tired. Right. Agreed. So I think that's the buy-in, and that's where I think the shift changes of don't just tell me, don't give me a checklist, and then don't have admin come check on me to make sure I'm doing that checklist. Show me.
yeah, it's like when you go through crisis intervention training or way back when you're an RBT and the BCBA would come in and see you for a small amount of time and be like, "Don't worry, just do this." And then they'll they leave, and then a behavior happens, and you're like, this looks nothing like
Yeah.
what
How
is
do I
on
do
this
that?
paper. Now what do I do? So then it's like, it's just a circular reasoning. Now we're going to start the process over, and they're going to come in and give another, solution that they're not there to implement themselves or carry it out. I know Bree has said many times, like,
Mm.
don't be a clipboard BCBA.
Yep.
And it's the same thing when providing any type of consultation service. Like, show them that the plan works by modeling and completing it yourself, because you may run into factors where you're like, oh crap, this plan doesn't work. Let's hit the drawing board together. And then that creates that collaborative feel as well. Nothing makes somebody feel more welcome and willing to listen to what you have to say than taking their opinion and
Validation.
correct and making
Yeah.
that work in your plan. I always tell teachers, and I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, like, here's the plan, please read it over and I'll model it for you. However, if any point in your time you're like, this is not going to work for me whatsoever, tell me right now and I will trash this entire thing and start over with you. Because I'd rather you tell me on the forefront, this is not conducive for me, my classroom, my schedule, than us waste valuable time in finding something that does work for you.
Absolutely. And I do that too, usually before that model stage. So I'll mention to them, like, here's some of the things that I'm going to be doing. Do you feel like up front that's like definitely not going to work? I absolutely have an issue with that. And then we just kind of use that guided discovery process to find what will work in that classroom, based on their values and the culture. And everybody has different abilities. And you mentioned, like, back to your RBT days, and I don't know, they weren't called RBT days. I think we were behavior techs at the time. I was getting experience hours, but the BCBA leaves, and I remember, like, what I thought was really big behaviors then, like, I mean, heart pumping, I'm sweating, I'm shaking. Like, it is like it shakes you to the core when you haven't fully been desensitized. And so I think it's so important to, like, remember that I'm walking into a classroom with a long learning history and exposure to really challenging behaviors. And so when something little comes up, like a sit down refusal in a gym, I'm like, okay, that's actually, like, not a big problem at all. Like, you should probably just check on them. Let me know if you need anything else. Like, but when you don't have the awareness of behavior and function of behavior and all of that exposure to behaviors, I mean, it's a lot for educators. It's scary, in fact.
Especially when you don't have that support, right? So if you're a newly certified RBT, or way back when we were techs, um, it made it so much worse when you didn't know when somebody was going to come in to support you.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you didn't have a walkie, you know what I mean? Like, you were out there on your own. So knowing that you have that support and you can call on somebody just makes all of the difference and does reduce a lot of that anxiety, because you have
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Have there been situations where, like, run through your steps, you felt really confident about what you accomplished, you leave, and then you come back and it's like almost all undone?
Absolutely. Isn't that life? That happens in my own personal home. I'll be, like, training somebody on stating things positively and, like, going through examples and non-examples, and I'm like, hmm, my entire breakfast with my children this morning is a non-example. Let me explain why. Right? Like, is that's life. Like, nobody behaves, quote unquote, perfectly 24/7. And I think that as long as that's the expectation up front, then to me, I think there's a section in behavior breakthrough that just explains, like, just start back over. We're going to get a million chances as professionals and educators and parents and caregivers to just start back over and rebuild.
And I think that is probably one of the most important things ever to hear, is that it's okay to start back over, because so many times do we ourselves, like, beat ourselves up because something doesn't go our way, or maybe the teacher's just having the rough day. And it's like, oh, well, it's all ruined and we're never going to get him back on track. And we ruined the plan and now everything's trashed. All right, start over. So let's start right back into the pairing stage. Like, that's okay. You can go back to step one and work through that again. There's nothing wrong.
And there doesn't have to be shame and guilt assigned to it. That doesn't mean anybody did anything wrong. It's literally just a part of the life process. Yep.
Speaking life, how did life really change for you after motherhood?
I mean, the things that I asked people to do at, in my early ABA days is shameful.
Yeah.
Shameful. Right? Like, doesn't parenthood shoot you through the fastest journey to reality, like faster than anything? I mean, and I'm like a very type A personality. I like order to things. I need routine. And you just don't get to have that when there are little humans around that, that need you all the time, right? I have a 3 and a 7-year-old. And so the needs in my house are constant and they're hyperverbal little girls with intense emotions. And
Feeling.
yes, I think that doesn't parent right like like I mean just there's like not even words to accurately describe how becoming a parent changes you in all aspects of life. How I talk and interact with my mother and my sister who's a mom and the neighbor who's a mom, right? Like, and I think that being a parent when you are solely responsible for a household and somebody's emotional, physical, medical, all of the needs and all of the executive functioning skills of a household, like, I mean,
You
it's
get good at using like one hand to do a lot of things,
Yeah.
or your feet.
yes,
Okay, people who work in this field and then go home and parent or have their own kids are the true superheroes
Thank
of
you.
the universe.
I'll take
Oh,
it.
is there any advice out there for parents who are in this field who love it and then also have obviously their children at home to not only separate but to reduce the likelihood of that burnout? Because like you had said earlier on, like it's very easy to take this stuff home, and that's not fair to your family, you know what I mean? You should be able to draw that clear boundary and expectation. And I know it gets jammed down people's throats sometimes where people are like, set boundaries, clear expectations,
Yeah.
but like really, what does that look like?
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So it's kind of, I feel like a multifaceted recipe for me. But just even going back to when I was a single mom, and I was the sole provider, I had no access to help, and I was insanely burnt out because I like didn't get a break. I mean, I remember getting like, the stomach bug that goes around the school, and I had no help, and I still have to parent, and like, I mean, just the real struggles that parenthood brings to people. Absolutely, the burnout is real. And, like I said, being a single mom and being the sole provider with no access to help, people are like, oh, just take break, take time for yourself. Just
I
like
love
I would love to. Like how? Like it felt so impossible and it logistically was because the amount of a break that I needed was not accessible to me. And so I think it has taken me years and it has taken me practice and it has taken me the understanding that to prevent burnout, it doesn't need to be a beach vacation because that's not always accessible when we need it. And it just can be little things of listening to your favorite song, taking longer in the shower while the other caregiver carries the load for a minute, right? Or like if you're a parent and you like really feel to your core that walk from after you buckle your child into the car seat and you shut the door and you walk to your driver's side of the door, that uh, right, like those to me, I think it's just normalizing and understanding and being aware that those little moments can count. And then for me, also professionally, I have always been the type of person and have the personality that I need like little bits at a time. I cannot do in home services for 3 clients 40 hours a week, right? That does not work for my personality. I want to go teach at a university for a little bit, and then I'm going to go do some in-home ABA therapy. Then I'm going to go over to this school district, and then I'm going to go work with my adult, and then I'm going to go, for me, it just needs to be little bits. So I think that everybody's personality is different. And I would also just like to normalize that that has taken me years and years and years to establish the ability and privilege to have little bits. So, not saying that that's the recipe that would work for everybody. And I know that I'm lucky to have established that, but that definitely helps for me with burnout.
Think we can agree with that. I feel like that's all three of us in a nutshell.
Yeah.
It's we do little bits of everything within behavior analysis, but each day is different. It's not day in, day out, like you said, those three clients, 40 hours a week, just in home. We're doing school consultation, we're doing stuff with the podcast. We do in-home stuff, we do staff training. So I think it definitely helps lighten the load a bit because your brain has to kind of flip between the different things, and you can't necessarily mentally spend all that time in that zone. So I think it helps for that too, because then you're able to switch it off a bit easier when you do go home at the end of the day.
What you had said kind of reminded me, one of my friends just recently had a baby, and it's her first one. And she is a nurse, so she has worked in high stressful situations and peds, so she's worked with children for a very, very long time. However, she told me one core moment after she had her daughter, and it was I was driving in the car. I didn't have my daughter with me, but all of a sudden I heard music again. She had said I was just so stressed for the first couple of months of having her that I didn't realize I stopped hearing music and listening to words. And then all of a sudden it had come back to me. And I'm sitting there I personally don't have kids, so I'm sitting there on the couch and she's telling me this story and I'm like, what do you mean? You didn't hear the music? But then like later on, yeah, I went in my car and I said, how many times do I get to a destination? And I didn't realize I got there.
Yeah.
And it's a very similar type of zone out
Yeah,
encounter.
autopilot. Yes.
So that again, small, you guys are superheroes, man. Coming home and then having that small window of time to just collect yourself and then jump right into something else where I just kind of like melt into the couch.
Oh, absolutely. After the kids go to bed, I mean, it is sit down on the couch mode, and I'll sit next to my husband, and he knows. Like sometimes we sit in silence for 10 minutes, sometimes it's an hour, and he kind of just knows like decision fatigue, all of the fatigues, right? That he just kind of waits for me to say the first thing, and then I'm like, all right, how was your day? I've like, composed myself enough that I can engage socially for sure. Yeah, I relate to sinking in the couch.
Hey.
Sorry.
No.
How many times have you heard, how was your day? And you're like, it was fine. Because like
Yeah.
you don't
Yeah.
have the energy
Or I don't
to
even know
explain what
Right.
had happened.
I don't know how to
throughout the day.
describe what my day was like, so we're
Right.
just gonna say it was
It was
fine.
Yeah.
fine. Thank you. I'm sure.
Yeah. But thank you for being so vulnerable and open about that because there's so much power that goes into what you do, what we do, and being a parent that a lot of times, you see social media, you see you hear the success, and you're like, wow, they're amazing. I bet that, they just did it all without any struggle. And then it's like, I haven't eaten in like 3 days. What are you talking about?
Yeah, right. I haven't gone to the bathroom all day. Somebody please step aside before, right? Like there is definite sacrifices, but I think too, we do need to normalize the struggle. Nobody always has it put together, and that's not the expectation. But I don't know. It's just that's just part of the journey. I just think normalizing it is, I don't know, hopefully what will provide hope to somebody that is looking from the outside in, thinking it's all perfect, and then can just normalize that. No, we are actually all struggling.
I think it goes back to even the original, like what you originally said about parents, like the interventions you would recommend before you were a parent is going to look very different than now. And I think that's such a huge takeaway because you have these experiences and you know that there are days that are struggles and then there's other days that are easier. So being able to give caregivers and teachers that grace and the ability to, let that thing slide. Maybe they are reinforcing that challenging behavior because that they just don't have the energy to, manage the challenges that might come up. So I think being understanding and putting ourselves in those shoes is major.
Yeah. Just being compassionate and flexible clinicians can go a really long way, but also normalizing that there are struggles beyond the science sometimes. Like, yeah, we could definitely run this plan, but also dad wants to take a nap.
Right.
So like, you know,
We've talked about that a lot on the podcast, is unforgivably like taking time for yourself and not feeling bad about it. Because when you internalize, of course, it's going to be hard. Like, let's say you're a mom and you want to go out for girls' night, but you always put your kids to bed. You can't internalize their feelings and make them yours. Yes, it may be difficult for them to go to bed, but if you don't go out and take care of yourself, how can you fill your bucket? It doesn't have to be going out, and it could be like going to a book club. It could be taking time to meditate. It could be going to the movies with your husband, whatever that looks like. If you're not filling your bucket and the things that you truly love and enjoy, like how could you be a really great parent? You know what I mean? Like you're going to burn yourself out. And of course, spending time with your kids does fill your bucket, but there's also those needs that existed before you had kids, and they don't just go away. They may change a bit, but that you time is so, so important for that piece of being a mom.
I agree. And I think also recognizing that it's about modeling that too. That's actually it's extremely empowering for our children. I want my girls to grow up and fill their buckets.
Mhm.
I want them to put their needs before anything. And how can I expect them to have that skill if I've never modeled it?
Practice what you preach, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
and
So, if you don't mind, with that being said, how do you fill your bucket? What are some things that you enjoy?
Um, I would say so. Our family has this whole, we are like the full-on camper lifestyle family. We live on our camper probably like 3.5 months out of the year, like not consecutive, but I mean, we camp all the time. I feel like what says a lot about a person is you're like scrolling, like what pops up on your reels or whatever. Mine are all like nomad families living out of their vans, like homeschooling, living out of their RV. I could so do it. It's so motivating to me. But here's why. Camper Bailey is so chill. Shoes on in the camper, shoes on the couch. Oh, it's like way past your bedtime and you want to sucker. Yes, like Camper Bailey is so chill. I take no work calls, no work emails. I literally, for whatever reason, I am totally able. I hear music, like you said earlier. I hear the music on the camper, and I am not able to ever fully check out at home. And that's just me and probably my personality. And that doesn't mean everybody needs a camper, but whatever your camper is, definitely go find your camper, whether that's driving country roads, whether that's, like you said, a book club, or that you finally meet that other mom friend, or other, whatever your camper is. I think that for not just burnout purposes, but also just life longevity reasons, we got to find our camper where you can check out.
And you live in Nashville, correct?
I do. I live outside of Nashville, Tennessee.
I was
Yep.
gonna say there's a lot of great areas to go for camping, hiking. There's like a ton of waterfalls too. So
Yes. I
I mean,
love that you know that. Yes.
I was just gonna say, are we making a trip?
no, oh, I am going to Nashville.
Oh, okay.
I've been to Nashville quite a few times though,
Okay.
to be fair.
But
It's
you
one,
don't, you still check your emails.
what do you, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I still check my emails, guys.
Camper Kate would definitely
Camper
check
Cape, Camper
it.
Cape's a little different than Camper Bailey.
Yeah.
However, it is one of my favorite places to go, especially for a girls' trip. That is how I fill my bucket. I love Nashville. For anybody who's looking for the sign to book a Nashville trip, this is your sign. But in terms of camping, they have a lot of beautiful areas, so I can definitely see why you guys take full on advantage of that.
Yes. Tennessee is beautiful. And definitely waterfalls. There's some insane waterfalls here. And Nashville is so fun. If you're a foodie person, I mean, Nashville is it.
For your husband, being a partner of someone like you, having the hard days and going through everything that you've been through, what what kind of support does he provide? Like what's his superpower for providing the support that you feel like you need?
I literally don't know that my husband really understands what I do for a living.
Nope.
And I am fine with that. When I get home, I don't want to talk about it. I want to talk about you. I want to talk about the girls. I want to talk about our next camp trip, right? Like that, mm, I don't know. Reliving professionally what is going on in my life is definitely not a solid core of our relationship. And I'm not saying that that's healthy or unhealthy. I'm just saying that works for us.
Thank you so much for joining us. Before we let you go, we always like to ask everybody where they can find you or if you're coming up at any speaking events.
Yeah, so you can definitely find Behavior Breakthrough at all major book retailers. So that's exciting. And then you can find me on the major social media platforms. I'm on Facebook, I think is Behavior Breakthrough with Bailey Payne. I'm on Instagram as Behavior Breakthrough. And then I just started a TikTok. So I have a like whole lot of 3 followers, but I dove into TikTok before it was shut down.
Well, thank you, Bailey, for joining us on today's podcast so we could talk about, your experience with an ABA and behavior breakthrough. We really appreciated having you on today.
Thanks so much.
Check out thekarmacollection.com for stylish ABA-inspired apparel that spreads the message of behavior science with every wear. Free shipping on orders over $120. thekarmacollection.com